Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This video comes as a consequence of several requests over a period of time, some for individual plants, some for general chit-chat about the subject. The subject is Coelogynes. Now this is quite a large genus, mainly cool growers, but not across the board. So if you delve into Coelogynes, quite honestly, you need to do your homework. First of all, where are you going to grow them? Then go and find ones that will be okay where you're going to grow them, if you see what I mean. Some are real cool to cold growers and are not going to be happy with any form of heat because they come from very high up. So they might get some pretty bright light. The air's thin, it's cool. It's always cool. Yeah? So different type of environment, and some of them can be classed as perfectly happy with intermediate temperatures and don't need a huge drop in temperature. So you would need to do your homework basically. The most common Coelogyne that comes up that most people have got, if they've got some, they've probably got this one, is the cristata. Now mine's actually a variety. It's actually variety Lemoniana. Which apparently has got nothing to do with the colour, and it's to do with the guy who actually named the variety, a Mr. Lemon, one would presume. Now cristata's got two schools of thought. One school of thought is that these need to dry off to the point of desiccation and cool right down in the winter. So almost the equivalent of a dendrobium's winter rest. Cool, quite bright and cool, like down to sort of 4 or 5 degrees. Not all the time, nighttime temperatures I'm on about, so a real drop in temperature for the winter and hardly any water, to the point where the pseudobulbs start to shrivel before giving them anything. That's one school of thought. The other school of thought is at Kew Gardens. One would normally assume they know what they're doing. And at Kew Gardens, they don't drop the temperatures right down, and they don't stop watering and feeding them. They reduce it somewhat, which is what you do to a lot of orchids in winter because they're not growing as much. Now I'm from that school of thought on the grounds. I've had a look round. Cristata can be found in many places. This is the problem. And some of those places do not get that cold in winter, and they're not necessarily dry. And it can also be found quite high up where it does get cold in winter, and you're more likely to get snow than rain. Now that's a hell of a variety of environments for one single plant to be found in. And I'm almost inclined to think that there are two forms, a real cool higher up dweller and one that comes from slightly warmer places that doesn't necessarily get as dry. And I've seen two distinct looking plants, both with the name cristata on them. One of them has shorter, rounder pseudobulbs that have a yellowish colour to them and paler leaves. Tends to be a smaller plant overall. And wherever I've seen that, the person involved does the dry, cool winter thing. And then there are others that have got ones that look more like mine, that tend to have larger pseudobulbs, more elongated rather than round, and a deeper green colour to the whole look to the plant. So are they the same plant, or are they a different form of the same plant? Anyway, as far as my care is concerned, it gets cooler in winter. Well, so does everything else in here. This doesn't live anywhere special. It does live down on the floor, which logically is the cooler of all the places I have choices for. But one of the main reasons this lives down on the floor is its size. It takes up a large amount of shelf because of its width, not its height, its width. Yeah, long strappy leaves and all that sort of stuff. Now, this is coming into bloom, which you might think for the size of the plant, 2 flower spikes is a bit meagre. Yeah, well, it isn't one plant. It's actually several pieces that were put in the same basket. It was basically split up, all the old tatty bits taken off, the leafless pseudobulbs, and what was left was placed in and around this basket. So it's not one plant. So I would suggest the bits that are blooming were the larger pieces. We've got a nice spike coming out here, which the first bud starts here. So I would say it's probably going to have 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 blooms on it, which is not bad. If it does have 4, that will be the most I've ever had on a single spike. But then this plant keeps getting mucked about. It keeps getting split up. And the idea of putting it in this basket is, as long as it will stay in there and not grow out, it can stay there. And there's another spike here that's been sat there doing nothing for a long time. So did that one. And then that one just suddenly started to move over the last week or two. And this one still hasn't moved. But just the two at the moment. And what I'm hoping for this year is a lot more new growth, so that each of those pieces becomes bigger and capable of blooming, and then maybe we'll get a few more blooms. Cristata tends to have arching spikes, and they can be quite large. On a nice mature plant, you can get a lot of blooms on a spike, you know, around the 10 mark. On an immature plant that's just coming into blooming size and everything, you're more likely to just get a couple, and then gradually the number of blooms per spike will increase as the size and strength of the plant increases. But they have a nice arching habit, and in the main they push away from the plant so they can be seen. Now on that subject, when you're choosing a coelogyne, choose with care. Some of them have incredibly long pendulous spikes. So straight out the side of the plant and head downwards. And they can be 3 feet long, over a metre long, with a cascade of blooms all the way down. They look stunning, but you've got to get them up in the air so that they can do that. So have you got a place for that type of plant? Yeah, think about it before you get it. If you've only got flat shelves, then where are the spikes going to go? So, glug of coffee. Okay, so choose your coelogyne carefully. Some of them only have single blooms, and they tend to be right in close to the plant. So they're buried in under the leaves, and they're difficult to see. Some of them have bolt upright spikes, with their flowers clear of the plant. So they're impressive. Some of them would arch over slightly. Yeah? So choose carefully, and also have a think about the size the plant can get to. Some of them are monsters and some are miniatures. It does vary a lot. Now cristata I would say is average, somewhere in the middle. But they can grow to a monster-sized plant, because once they get a hold and they're happy, their rate of growth is incredible. I mean, I have a friend who split one up. He split it into 3, and each piece is, they're in a basket 2 foot across, 2 foot circular basket. They're absolutely solid, with bulbs coming up on top of each other, and at the moment one of them is just a mass of blooms. They can get big, and don't forget that plant is a third of the original. The original plant, last time I saw it before it was split, took 4 people to carry it into the show, 1 in each corner. Took up half the table. They can get big. It's their rate of growth. Yeah. Some of them grow very slowly. Okay, so that's cristata done out the way. Very popular. Not that difficult to bloom. Some coelogynes are tykes to actually get them to bloom. People grow them well, they just cannot get them to bloom. And I'll say now that I'll put a link at the end of this video to a good coelogyne site. I think it's got all the species in it and a lot of the hybrids and a good description of each one with like a grading system. You know, like this one's a 4-star job. If you're going to have one, this would be a good one to get. And then reasons why some of them aren't so good, perhaps. So it's a good place to stop off and have a look round. Right, this is my little one, and it's got watered yesterday, and boy does this need repotting. And what I'm going to do with this one, this is Coelogyne nitida. Used to be ochracea. It's a much easier name nowadays, and it still gets sold as ochracea, and I've seen it in shows still named ochracea. It's a name that people just don't seem to want to drop, but the name has officially changed, and this is what it's now called. Now this is a relatively small grower for quite a long time, and then it will take off. It's just something clicks in the plant that says, right, I'm big enough to double in size this year, and it'll go mad. And again, I've seen one of these at Ridlington that's in a basket over 3 foot by 2 foot deep, and there is no basket left. The plant has covered it down the sides, mounded over the top. It's just at the basket. So they can grow big again, but not tall. You know, these are the size of the leaves. They don't get too big. But mine's currently got 2 new growths coming, which may or may not bloom. I can't remember where this one blooms from, whether it blooms out of the base of the bulbs or whether it actually comes out of the apex of the leaves. They vary, and that's another thing you need to look into. That's another cool grower. But it doesn't mind a bit of warmth. It'll put up with it. It'll prefer to be a cool grower and stay cool, you know. And very, very attractive flowers on this one. Typical Coelogyne colours, yes, but it's when you look closer at the bloom and look at the coloured pattern in the centre of the lip. It's just stunning, yeah. But it's a close-up look. They're not giant flowers. Cristata are medium to large blooms. Nitida are medium. Not small. Some Coelogyne blooms are tiny. But then you'd get dozens and dozens and dozens of them. And the other one I've got is a tyke. This is Coelogyne moareanna. And it's the variety Magnifica. Came from Burnham's originally. I can't remember whether I got it from Burnham's. Probably. But I think that is one of their own named clones, if you see what I mean, from back in their Chelsea days when they got a lot of RHS awards. They don't do Chelsea anymore, I don't think. Right, so this one is a tyke. If it dries out, the roots will shrivel. If it stays soggy, the roots will rot. Fussy tyke. It's just another one of those, you know. It thinks it's a Miltoniopsis, quite honestly. It's got delusions of grandeur. Nonetheless, this is one of the large white Coelogynes. It's classed as a large white. The flowers are large, literally. And they come straight out of the top of an immature growth. So it's got a strange blooming habit. It's also got a problem whereby if it dehydrates in any shape or form as the leaves are forming, they will do that. Now that almost looks like too much water and blisters, but it's not. It's hollows. This is the equivalent of the concertina leaves on cymbidiums. And basically this plant will do it if it lacks hydration while the leaves are growing strongly. And the reason mine's got it, it's because it lost its roots. It objected to being repotted. And then it grew some new growths after being repotted, which has now established a root system. Yeah? These are hairy roots on this one. So a bit like the Paphiopedilum roots, except for they're white. And it's now established a good root system in that pot. So it can now cope with anything it decides to do. What it's deciding to do here is a new growth. Now that could push a bloom spike straight out. It pushes the bloom spike out well before the leaves are fully formed. So as it forms a shape, it opens at the top and the spike comes out. And then afterwards the leaves form. So it's got a strange growth. And it doesn't always bloom on every new growth. But over here I've got 2 more. And this is a lovely big fat shiny bulb. And the leaves almost manage to not crinkle. And that's the bit with the good roots underneath. So 2 new growths over here. Either of them could bloom or neither of them could bloom, but I got a feeling this one here, up against that big fat bulb with that number of roots underneath it, will probably bloom. There may be more. It seems to push out new growths as and when. It doesn't seem to have a season necessarily, but we shall see. It did bloom not that long ago, and I did have 2, and the other one went to Milan from Wessex Orchid Society, who pops up frequently on the Facebook group. Yes, so that's my 3. They are different. Cristata's not too keen on having its roots disturbed, but if it's done at the right time, it will recover. But sometimes you can disturb a cristata and it will sulk for a year and not grow any new growths or any new roots. It'll just sit there. And during that period, they're not that easy to look after, because they've had their roots disturbed, some of which are now not very good, but it's not growing either. It's just sulking, and they can sulk for a while. This one I've never had a problem with. I mean, this is a very young plant. I got it as a couple of bulbs, and it is slowly growing on. So we'll see where that one gets to. I'm hoping it's going to bloom, but we'll have to wait and see. What I'm going to do with that is somewhere, God knows where I put them, well, they're in here somewhere. There are smaller versions of this, yeah? And I think, because this needs a repot, I'm going to try it in one of these open baskets. The reason being, I can control the watering because there is so much availability of air, yeah? So if I want them to, they can dry off quickly. If I don't want them to, then it's up to me to keep up with the watering. But it gives me the options. Whereas this one through the winter was very difficult because it wasn't growing. So there's no new growths, no new roots. And even though it's in a small pot and it's got some reasonable roots, it wasn't growing. So every time I watered it, it stayed wet for ages, which is bordering on soggy, which we do not want. The root system on this is quite sturdy and chunky. So these are very fine roots on this one. These are sturdy, chunky roots. And as such, they like some air around them. So this is in larger bark. This is in small bark and moss. Fine root system. And this one is in small and medium bark mixed with moss in the middle, and then surrounded round the outside with just moss to hold it all in place, stop it falling out of those slats. So that's what I've got mine in. And that is mealybugs. Oh, there's only a couple. Oh, they're dead now anyway. So just those few. Yeah, I can't see any more at the moment. But yeah, I mean, as the warmer weather comes round, things will start getting about again. We'll have to deal with them. Oh, actually, that's a scale. That's a dead one. If they just flick off like that, they're dead. So they've suffered from treatment in the past. Yeah. Okay, so that's my 3. And if you're interested in getting Coelogynes, then choose wisely. And there is a multitude of choice, from small plants to large plants to giants, yeah, to those with long pendulous spikes, to those with arching sideways spikes, as I'll call them, like these. These don't grow upright, they always grow out sideways and arch. But they're not what you would class as pendulous. They don't head to the floor immediately. And some with spikes that are quite upright. Some have spikes with few numbers of blooms, and a lot of those are large. Some of them have dozens and dozens and dozens of smaller blooms. Colours, anything really, although mainly white with brightly coloured centres in the lips, combinations of reds, yellows, oranges, golds, things like that. And that white can fade through to greeny colours, to creamy colours, to fawn. There's a strange colour for you. It's an old-fashioned colour, isn't it? It's a sort of browny, creamy colour. So all those sorts of shades you can get. And there are others. There are some that are actually quite rich brown colours. in places like in the centre of the lip and things like that. So a multitude of choices, and if you can get at the site, you can have a look through, and apart from one or two plants, the guy's got his pictures as well as his descriptions and a page for each type of coelogyne. So there's a lot of information there. I mean, if you read it one page after the other, there will be some repetition, obviously, but that's the nature of trying to put information together about one genus. But I found it a useful site. It's based in Australia, but I'm pretty sure that the guy has made sure that he talks about seasonal variations using the words of the season, not the month of the year, because he's from Australia. And obviously what goes on in March in the northern hemisphere is not necessarily what goes on in March in the southern hemisphere. So he uses spring or summer or winter. That way it becomes universal, whatever part of the world you're in. Anyway, that's my three, and all have bloomed. One's going to be in bloom in the not too distant future. One may or may not be, because I can't remember how it blooms. And this one may or may not be, depending on the fact that it's got 3 new growths, any of which or none of which could actually push a spike out the top. So we shall wait and see. But this will be the next set of coelogyne blooms. And we haven't had Coelogyne cristata for 2 years, because it didn't bloom last spring at all, nothing. But then it hadn't long been disturbed. Whereas now it's had over a season, you know, it's had a season and some to settle in a bit. And this one is just about going to stay in its pot, but you can see the size that the bulbs get to, or can get to. So these next two round here are going to be fighting for space. Yeah? This one will probably sit on the edge of the pot, and this one will come this way, and they'll push each other away. Yeah? This one, it's just about got enough room, and then we'll see what happens next. But yeah, that's my three. See you next time. Bye for now.